This video will explain the life cycle of stars. So we know that stars are basically formed from clouds of hydrogen gas, and they start off in something called a nebula. Okay, basically the clouds slowly contract towards its center. So you've got lots of this gas and the dust, which is the nebula itself, and these start contracting towards the center. So basically, we call that idea hydrostatic equilibrium. Now, we do need to know this before we jump into the life cycle, because this is really the basis of what is causing stars to burn bright and have different colors, etc. So hydrostatic equilibrium is when stars are in their main sequence, and there is a balance between gravity pulling those atoms towards the center of the star. Okay, so those gases being pulled towards the center of the star, and also the pressure of heat and light radiating out from the star. Okay, so there is a balance and equilibrium between the pressure pushing outwards and the gravity pushing the star inwards. Okay. So basically, the life cycle of the star here's a really good picture explaining what is happening at each stage. So stellar nebula, like I said before, all stars start off here. You've got dust, you've got lots of gases as well. It's basically what all of these clouds look like, okay? We've got an average star, okay? And basically the life cycle can follow this pathway or it can follow this pathway. And it really depends on what type of nuclear fusion is taking place with the stellar nebula. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll start looking at this pathway and then we'll look at this pathway. So a sun-sized star, okay, so basically a sun-sized star has a mass of between 1 to 5 sun. So basically that unit there just means that, for example, 1 sun is the mass of one of our suns, okay? Anything, for example, 2 suns would be basically double the size. Okay, so basically what's happening is that a star is born. Okay, it will then form into a main sequence star, then a red giant, then a planetary nebula, white dwarf, and black dwarf, as we can see with this pathway here. So what we'll do is we'll start looking at these in a little bit more detail, just so we can understand what's happening. So first of all, star birth. Okay, dust and gas in the nebula are compressed, and something called a protostar is produced. Now, continued compression of the protostar causes a high amount of heat to be produced. Okay, that's because we need to have nuclear fusion take place. Okay, nuclear fusion is when the nuclei of those atoms are bumping into each other, and that causes a reaction which produces a lot of heat. Okay, that heat's really important. So the second thing is a main sequence star. So basically, most stars are in the main sequence, okay, and this is the most stable part of a star's lifespan. We have nuclear fusion take place when hydrogen gas is fused to helium. Okay, so hydrogen nuclei itself will then be converted into helium nuclei. As it does this, as nuclear fusion takes place, lots of energy is released, and light as well. Okay, so heaps and heaps of energy. The third part of the life cycle is that after the hydrogen gas has been used up, a red giant will form. Now that hydrogen gas is continuously burnt, okay, but in some cases it will run out. Now, the reason why most stars are in this main sequence is because, remember the hydrostatic equilibrium? We've got an equal pressure pushing outwards, and we've got an equal pressure, equal force of gravity pushing down towards the center. Okay, that's quite nice. There's a nice balance between those two factors. But for example, if the gas is running out from the center of the star, the pressure is going to have a greater impact. Okay, so in that case, after hydrogen has been used up, a red giant will be formed. Two things can happen at the same time in this case. So the core carries on contracting and heating up, okay, as I said, because you've got more of a pressure of gravity pushing it inwards. It will heat up even more, and that heat actually means that helium will fuse basically up to carbon. So hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon. Okay, we'll keep fusing all of those as it happens. So the other layers expands and cools. Okay, and basically the star is now red because it is cooler. Now, at this point here, you may need to go back and look at the color of the stars. Okay, because remember, blue means that it is hot, and red, that means that it is cold. Okay, it's a little bit different to the colors of like a tap, for example. Okay, so the luminosity itself is very, very large. Okay, so luminosity means that the energy released is very large. Okay, so just a picture looking at a red giant, which is an old sun. Okay, sun-sized star has then formed this red giant. Okay, the fourth point there is a planetary nebula. Okay, so basically contracting is taking place even further, and all of the helium has now fused into carbon. The core becomes stable because the core has too little mass to compress carbon atoms. Okay, so carbon basically can't be compressed anymore. It basically means that it is now solid. Okay, the outer layers of the star continues to expand and usually drifts off into space, and that forms something called a planetary nebula. Now, some of that material that drifts off can actually be used to produce new stars, because remember, dust and gas is what is producing stars. Okay, so this is basically what a nebula looks like. As we can see, it looks pretty cool. All the surrounding dust here. Okay, actually, that is not a nebula. That is what we're talking about here. Okay, well, basically, it is a nebula, but it's the planetary nebula, and it's looking at the parts of, sorry, the material that's been released, okay, which is all of this stuff here. Looks pretty awesome. Okay, to white dwarf, basically a star is now a white dwarf and it has no energy left, because it's fused all of those atoms. Now it's got no energy left, and it radiates just leftover heat for billions of years. So pretty much is a dead star. It is very dense. Okay, the mass is similar to the sun, but the volume is similar to Earth. So white stars will then cool and then turn to a red color. A black dwarf, okay, When all of the heat has disappeared, the star becomes cold black dwarf, which is a sad dead star made of carbon. Okay, so I'm sorry, I did say that a white dwarf is dead. It is not dead. It is almost dead. Okay, white dwarf and then black dwarf is the dead star. Okay, so basically that is what we talked about here, this pathway here, white dwarf and then the black dwarf, the dead star. Okay, that pathway is only if we have an average star or a main sequence star fusing the helium, hydrogen to helium. Okay, so we do need to look at this pathway as well. I do know that it is quite a lot to learn, but we do need to know what's happening. So a huge or massive star, this one here, okay, we'll start looking at that pathway as well. So basically we can see the size, it's a lot larger than the mass of the sun, okay. We just looked at this one here, average size star, and this one's massive, 10 to 30 times the size. So basically star birth will happen, okay. We have main sequence supernova and then a supergiant produced, okay. Okay, so supergiant is exactly the same as a red giant formation, except that fusion continues beyond carbon. Okay, so we have heavier elements that are being fused in the periodic table, and yeah, those are basically the heavier elements. Because the core is larger and is becoming more dense and hotter, the core heats up more. So we have a very, very hot core. Iron is what eventually gets produced. Okay, so hydrogen, helium, lithium, beryllium, boron, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, fluorine, neon, sodium, magnesium. Okay, so quite a long way to go. Okay, so blue supergiant stars. Look at this, looks pretty awesome. It is a big blue glowing ball of burning gas. Okay, supernova is the next thing. So gravity will then cause the core to collapse instantly. Okay, so the core itself, remember fusion is taking place of its heavier elements. Some cases that collapses instantly, and then the iron atoms in the core are crushed. Okay, when they are crushed, basically the temperature rises, okay, to very, very high degrees. So 100 billion degrees Kelvin. Remember, Kelvin is the unit we use in astronomy. Kelvin has a higher scale than degrees Celsius. Okay, so this is, way, way, way higher than degrees Celsius. It is degrees Kelvin. So iron is compressed so much that the iron nuclei become very close, and then they actually repel each other. They bounce or have repulsive electrical forces pushing away from each other. When that happens, we have massive, bright, short-lived explosions. Okay, so you have a big flash of bright light, okay, but they're often short-lived or very, very, don't take long at all. Okay, so during the explosion, unimaginable temperatures are reached. All over elements in the universe are made in the vast energy of a supernova explosion. Okay, you can see these on movies sometimes, a big explosion, that's the supernova. Okay, so here what I was talking about before, these, where are we? Supergiants fusing iron. We're just looking at chemistry here, talking about the periodic table. Can we find iron? Where is iron? Fe. Okay. Should know where it is by heart, but I've lost where. Hopefully you can find it quicker than I can. Okay, so yes, so iron itself, here we go, 26, we've just passed over it. So if we are fusing all of these elements, so all the atoms, the nuclei itself are fusing hydrogen, that's the main sequence star, to helium. Okay, then just imagine fusing taking place of all of these, okay, all the way through neon to sodium, sodium to magnesium, magnesium to aluminium, aluminium to silicon, to phosphorus, okay, to chlorine, to argon, potassium, calcium, etc., 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 all the way to iron. Now, iron is the last part, okay, of the fusion, the last eventual fusion that can take place. Okay, so after the supernova happens, basically it depends on the mass of the star. So we've got a big explosion. If the star has a remaining mass, it will collapse to form something called a neutron star. Okay, if it is bigger, it will turn into a black hole. Okay, so just remember, if it explodes, we do have some mass left over, and if that mass is between 1.5 to 3 suns, pretty close to the mass of the sun, it will then collapse and form a neutron star. If it is bigger, we'll have a black hole produced. Okay, so if there's mass remaining, neutron star produced. A neutron star has an incredibly strong magnetic field and a rapid spin. Okay. Okay, so this should be the last point here, the black hole. So it's a region of so much gravity that not even light can escape it. Okay, so again, you've probably seen on movies, black holes, or people don't know too much about black holes, but we know more now, okay? We can't really observe black holes. We can only detect their effects. Okay, so here is just a table to look at the main sequence stars and look at their lifespan. Okay, so I do appreciate that it has been a very long video, but hopefully it makes some sense as to the life cycle of stars.